All right, today we're going to break down a recent analysis that connects two huge events that, on the surface, seem totally separate. A really shocking U.S. jobs report and the start of a new war in the Middle East. The analysis we're looking at makes a really provocative argument, and we're going to walk through it all, the claims, the data, and its conclusions step by step. So, it all starts with this one number, negative 92,000. In February of 2026, the U.S. economy didn't just hit the brakes, it actually went backwards, losing 92,000 jobs. According to the source, this was a total shocker, the worst miss since 2021. The analysis doesn't just call it a statistic, it calls it a structural scream. And that really gets us to the core question this whole analysis is trying to answer. Was this sudden economic nosedive just an unfortunate stumble, a blip on the radar? Or, as the source argues, was it something else entirely, the predictable, maybe even deliberate, collateral damage of a huge geopolitical decision? Okay, so first up, let's dive right into the first part of this argument, the economic shock itself. To really get what the source is claiming, we have to start with the data it's presenting. Now, the source is really quick to point out that this is about way more than just that headline job loss number. The unemployment rate itself actually ticked up to 4.4%. But, what's maybe even more worrying is that the labor force participation rate fell to its lowest level in over 4 years. That suggests a whole bunch of Americans just gave up and stopped looking for work altogether. And when you dig into where these jobs were lost, things get even more revealing. Healthcare, usually a rock-solid sector, lost 28,000 jobs, and the source ties that directly to major strike activity. At the exact same time, leisure and hospitality, which is super sensitive to how people are feeling about their wallets, lost another 27,000 jobs. So, a really critical question comes up here. When the economy takes a hit like this, who actually feels the pain the most? The answer the source provides is where we see the first major twist in its argument. And this is where the analysis lays its cards on the table. It points to the black unemployment rate, which shot up to 7.7%. That's almost double the rate for white workers. The argument here is that this isn't just a sad statistic. It's proof of a pattern, that in times of what it calls war-induced economic stress, it's the most vulnerable who are always the first to be sacrificed. Okay, so that's the economic picture. But that brings us to the second and maybe the most crucial part of this whole analysis. This is where the source connects that domestic economic shock to a specific event happening halfway across the world. The whole thing hinges on what it calls the geopolitical pivot. Now, this timeline, this is everything for the source's argument. Look at the dates. On February 28th, the U.S. and Israel launch Operation Epic Fury against Iran. Then, just 6 days later, bam, that devastating jobs report drops. For the author of this analysis, that timing is no coincidence at all. The markets reacted instantly to the military operation, and it was not pretty. The analysis shows how oil prices just shot through the roof almost overnight. West Texas crude hit its highest price in 2 years. Brent crude, the big global benchmark, jumped past $92 a barrel. And here at home, the average price of gas leaps from $3.19 to $3.50, pretty much wiping out any relief American families had been feeling. And to really hammer this point home, the source pulls this quote from Brian Jacobson at Annexed Wealth Management, who warns about stagflation. That's the economic nightmare scenario, right? The economy is stalling out, but prices are still going up. It's the worst of both worlds for everyday people and for the folks trying to manage the economy. So from here, the analysis zooms out. It argues that this specific crisis isn't just a one-off event, but it's actually a symptom of a much, much bigger issue with America's national priorities. And this is where we get a look at the bigger picture of national priorities. The source presents this data showing that 54%, over half of all U.S. discretionary spending goes to the Pentagon and the military. The argument being made is pretty simple. Our budget shows what we value, and the scales are tipped heavily, heavily towards defense. And to make this even more concrete, the analysis brings in research from Brown University's Costs of War project. So think about it like this. For every $1 million you spend on the military, you create about 5 jobs. But if you invested that same $1 million in education, you'd create 13 jobs. The point the source is making is that by prioritizing military spending, the government is actively choosing the least effective way to create jobs for its own people. Okay, so that's the big picture on spending. But how does the source connect all of this back to those 92,000 people who lost their jobs back in February? And right here, this is the absolute core of the argument. It alleges that at the very same moment 92,000 Americans were getting pink slips, the U.S. was putting the finishing touches on a $21.7 billion military aid package for Israel. The analysis says this is not a coincidence. Instead, it calls it the price of hegemony, basically the cost of being the world's policeman, so to speak. But the analysis doesn't just stop at the numbers. It also digs into the human side of things and even looks back at history, suggesting that we have seen this exact kind of thing play out before with some pretty devastating results. To really understand what losing a job does to a person, the source brings up this incredible study from the 1930s called the Marienthal experiment. Researchers found that when a town's main factory shut down, people lost so much more than just a paycheck. They lost the hidden things work gives you, the structure for your day, your social circle, your sense of having a purpose. And the analysis argues that this same deep social damage is happening right now. And then the analysis pulls out a historical parallel that's, well, it's pretty chilling. It compares this situation directly to the 1973 oil crisis, and it points out that both times the crisis was kicked off by events related to U.S. support for Israel in a conflict. But here's the kicker, a huge difference. Back in 1973, U.S. national debt was manageable. Today, it's over 101% of GDP, which leaves the country with, and these are the source's words, zero margin for error. So after laying all of this out, the economics, the geopolitics, the human cost, the history, it all comes down to one final point, which is framed as a fundamental choice about our future. The whole complex argument gets boiled down to this: 92,000 jobs gone, oil at $92 a barrel, and one choice. So what is it? What's the ultimate choice we're facing here, according to this analysis? Well, it's framed in the most dramatic way possible. And this is how the source leaves it. The ultimate choice, it argues, is between funding military campaigns overseas and investing in things we need at home, like education. The choice, it says, isn't really about foreign policy at all. It's about what kind of future we're building, or stealing, right here at home, every time we choose, in its words, a missile over a classroom. And the analysis closes with this powerful quote from Martin Luther King Jr. "Wars are poor chisels for carving out peaceful tomorrows." It's a really thought-provoking way to end, connecting a single month's job report to some of the biggest questions we face about our priorities and the real cost of conflict.